The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Shana Tova, friends. Happy New Year to all of those, well, anybody, really, but certainly to those that are of the Jewish faith. It is, of course, the first day of Rosh Hashanah today. I know it's a 2-day deal. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, I am indeed of the Jewish faith, and it's why this podcast is coming late today. So not only am I wishing everybody a Happy New Year, but also apologizing for having some stuff that sort of took us out of our normal routine. I know this podcast coming about 4 or 5 hours tardy, and I hope you guys can forgive me for that. But the streak continues. Non-existent streak, though it may be. We will still... You know, what's really nice, actually, and here Dan getting sidetracked right out of the chute again, what's really nice is that even when I was taking a break from this podcast, the show continued without a break day. I don't think we've actually had a missed, technicalities, I suppose. We haven't had a week without 5 shows since we officially launched this thing, and that was in November of 2016. So we're coming up on almost 2 years in existence on this pod, and we haven't had less than 5 shows in a week in any one of those spans. That's pretty cool, and thank you to everybody that continues to listen to the podcast as we ramp our way towards NBA opening night. The listenership grows. This is that time of year. Oh, this is such a fun time of year, guys. This is the best time of year. This is when everybody starts coming back. Welcome back to the fold, friends. I can watch the listenership on the podcast numbers just growing by the day. I'm flipping back to last year, and this is around the same time that it happened, maybe a little sooner this time around, or maybe I'm confusing folks coming back a little sooner with actually just growing listenership. But either way, it's pretty cool. It's good to have you guys back. To those that have been listening since day one, thank you. You are the heartbeat of this podcast. I know all of you have heard me yell at you to rate and review the pod 1,000 times. For those of you that have not, that are newer to Fantasy NBA Today, please, if you have a moment, if you like what you're listening to, take a second to hop on over to whatever the rating system is that you're on. Obviously, Apple is the most, that's the one that drives the boat, the engine, whatever metaphor you want to call on this thing. The podcast app on your mobile device will connect you with the Apple reviewing system or just using iTunes on your computer. But if they have easy-to-use rating and reviewing systems on Stitcher and Spotify and Google Play and Facebook and YouTube, we got all these things going. We got the podcast everywhere you can find a podcast. I took a lot of time to make sure that was the case. What am I forgetting? iHeartRadio, it's there too. You got iHeart. And anywhere that a classic feed, an RSS feed can occur, you can get it there as well. I am Dan Besbris. It's a Monday pod, which means I am solo today, although things will be changing here over the next couple of weeks. I'm not going to announce any actual dates when this stuff is going to shake itself out, but I would say that a ballpark would be October 1st, where things are really going to take a bit of a turn in the Hoop Ball Fantasy Podcast division. So excited to tell you guys what we have up our sleeves over here, but I'm not going to spill the beans yet. I'm going to keep the beans in the can. The beans are safely contained within the jar in which they came. It's well-preserved, non-perishable beans. Oh, but man, it's going to be... You're going to love it. And it's free stuff, too. That's the best part. The new podcast stuff we got coming out, it's free. It's free. You hear me? Free stuff. Probably 2 new shows coming in the next month here at Hoop Ball. So we continue to grow on the podcast side. Just beyond excited about what the next phase is here. And then Fantasy NBA Today is going to take a little bit of a turn in terms of how each show is put together as well. Timing-wise, things are also going to shift for this coming season. And again, I'll make sure that all of that is outlined for you as we approach when it's actually going to happen. Like I said, probably about 3 weeks. That's my best guess here, around October 1st. I had a plan for today's podcast, and the plan went up in flames. The plan was, and many of you probably saw this on Twitter, I was part of an industry mock draft put on by Josh Lloyd over at Basketball Monster. It was a lot of fun. There were a number of us in it, trying to figure out the names of everybody that were involved in the mock draft. It was Josh himself, Tim Bontemps, who writes for the Washington Post, Kyle McCune. He's a Basketball Monster. He's been on this podcast before. Matt Smith of Basketball Monster. We've had him as a guest. Jonas Nader of Roto World. Greg Ehrenberg, DFS guy, also at BBM. Mike Catron, might be mispronouncing that. Have to get him on the pod here. Mark Roberts of Hashtag Basketball. We've had him on the pod. Adam King, Jordan Schultz, Dylan Shuck, myself. It was an 8-cat Roto mock draft, although I accidentally drafted for 9-cat the first couple of rounds. My plan was to actually go over some of the results of that. But it's gone. Like any good commissioner, Josh Lloyd actually got rid of the league after the mock was done so that it wouldn't actually turn into a legitimate league. He did the right thing, but I forgot to cut and paste it. So those results have now been lost to the ether, although I assume he probably has them. If you desperately would like to see how that mock draft turned out, just send a tweet at any one of those people that I just listed. They probably were more on top of it than I was. I had other stuff going on, guys. Get off my back. So we changed the plan on today's podcast. Now we're going to have a two-pronged show. Number one is I'd like to get you guys the update on the Hoop Ball Draft Guide. I know I've been pushing that here on the podcast. It's basically the only thing that we sell at Hoop Ball is the Draft Guide and the Season Pass. The Season Pass has the Draft Guide and the in-season premium membership all rolled into one. That's a pretty sweet deal. Draft Guide itself has the Draft Guide and the Bruski-150. I should rephrase the way this is all put together. So the Draft Guide has the Draft Prep and the Bruski-150. The Season Pass has the Bruski-150, the Draft Prep, and the in-season premium membership. All right, that made more sense. Go with that one. I'm not going to edit out the first part because I think it's funny for you guys to hear me trip over myself. On top of the other, what I just mentioned, the Bruski-150 is available for early access on 9/20, September the 20th, 10 days from now. You have to get a special early pass on that. That costs a little bit more. Not surprisingly, if you want ultra early access to something as valuable as the B150, it does cost a little bit more. If you can wait until October 1st, the Bruski-150 gets added to the Draft Guide. So Draft Prep and B150, that's, to me, if when you want this premium stuff is going into the season, you have to get the Draft Guide. Because on October 1st, we'll have the B150, which is just, and now I've seen it, by the way. Brew gave me the rundown. He gave me the ideas a few weeks back. He sort of let me in on the gist of it. Well, now I've seen it, and you're going to want it. It is loaded with crazy values. Although I will say, in comparing the B150 this year to last year, it's going to be less polarizing, I think. And I mean that because last year there were some things that he put in there that people got mad about, or not mad, but just got excited, either good or bad excited, that have now just become sort of fact. Like, for instance, looking at last year's B150, Bruski had Blake Griffin down in the hundreds. And I believe, and Aaron, maybe you, if you're listening to this podcast, you can tweet at me and let me know if I got this right. I believe your description on that particular pick last year, 2017, 2018, was "don't at me." I think that was it. And then everybody, I'm sure, looked at it and went, "What are you talking about?" And now everybody can't stand Blake Griffin. This is why you need the B150. This is why you need the Hoop Ball Draft Guide. It is a year ahead of everybody else. And you're going to look at it this year, you're going to be like, well, I could get upset or excited or whatever at this thing that Brew put, but bleep. That's me censoring myself. Bleep it. It's going to be right by the end of the season. So anyway, go get that. It's $13.99 right now. $2 off if you have the promo code from listening to my appearance on the In This League podcast from Friday. Go back and listen to the In This League show. You can get a promo code to get a couple bucks off the draft guide. Get it now. Get it while the price is $14. Get it before the price goes up anymore. It does continue to go up as you get closer to the season. And get it because the B150 will be in your hands 3 weeks from today. We also had a couple other fun things added to the draft guide, by the way, just over the weekend. Lists of players that can crush your percentages. They call that the percentage pariahs. It's a section of the draft guide of guys you could potentially avoid if you're worried about having to punt anything. There is the high mileage report, the elder statesman, an article on older players in the NBA that could potentially help or hurt your fantasy team. A head-to-head strategy guide, also available, just added to the draft guide as well. DFS guide in the draft guide. All of this stuff getting added every day, every week. There are more pieces going in there. Well, that's your promo part of the show, but at the same time, it's a promo because I wanted you guys to know exactly what you're getting and when in the draft guide. Because frankly, I'm not sure that I was perfectly clear on last week's programs. I think that there was maybe some confusion on what was included in what. You can go to hoop-ball.com. There's a giant draft guide promo part on the front page. You can find everything you need there. That, by the way, is part one of today's podcast. I just wanted to dedicate a chunk of time to letting you guys know exactly what you'd get if you purchased the draft guide. Apologies. I know many of you are listening here for the first time, and you're like, what is this? The show is just promo stuff. It is right now, because generally this next month of podcasts is going to be so critical to your fantasy success that I feel like, frankly, it's just fine for me to spend a minute or two promoting something. We sell so very few things at Hoopball. Almost everything we give you guys is completely free. So every once in a while, we're like, listen, we gotta power this locomotive. So big thanks to everybody from Hoopball for helping put that thing together. You guys have been amazing. Thank you, of course, to my two guys here, Adrian and Neil, working with me on the podcast side. Awesome stuff coming up on that front. The other part of today's show that I wanted to spend a minute on is there actually was a little bit of NBA news that came out over the weekend. There were the little pieces of news, and then there was the big piece of news. We're going to start with a little. Little piece of news number one. Luol Deng is headed home to Tom Thibodeau. Like anybody didn't see that coming. Luol freaking Deng, who, by the way, for Laker fans, they have to be absolutely thrilled that he took the buyout he took. That he relinquished over $7 million just to get the hell out from underneath that awful contract the Lakers gave him. He's gone. And I honestly hope that there aren't a ton of hard feelings there, because it seems like there's every reason for there actually to be hard feelings. You know, the Lakers signed this dude. They played him for a year of his contract. They just sat him, wouldn't even let him come to the bench because they were worried it would turn into a sideshow. Basically said that they weren't going to play him again this coming year. And for Deng, it was like, listen, I've had a good NBA career. I've got a good amount of money. And let's be honest, people. I didn't pull it up, but I'm going to do it now while I'm talking about it. Luol Deng, his total salary over his entire career, I have to assume he's made $100 million. Is that crazy? That's not crazy, right? I'm sure we could look it up. Let's see what Luol Deng's cash earning. $134 million. That's before the buyout, I believe. And it'll be 163 by the time this whole contract is done. Guys, not that anybody should either be upset or happy with what's gone on here with Luol Deng. You know, like, he wants to be playing basketball, obviously, but and there's the side of this discussion of athletes have to make the money for their entire lives over a 10 to 15 year span. But if that amount of money is $134 million, you're good. You're good. You don't need more than that. You can put $133 million of that into the safest savings option out, like a certificate of deposit. Put it in an account that gets like 2% interest. And 2% interest on $133 million is still almost $3 million a year. Right? So your money is earning $3 million a year just by sitting there. So you're set, guys. You're set. So for him, he was like, listen, I don't need this other $7 million. My money is making money. Get me out of here. I'm going to go someplace where I can play. And I hope that the Lakers were so grateful that, they bought him, all the champagne he could want on the way out. He seemed like a very nice guy. But anyway, he's off to Minnesota, and who knows what that's going to do out there. They'll probably try to play him, right? I mean, Thibodeau brought in Taj Gibson and insisted on playing him. He's a favorite. They're going to find a way to get him out there, probably at the expense of guys like Andrew Wiggins, maybe Anthony Tolliver, too, if he's playing the 4. You're definitely not drafting Luol Deng. But what this does do is it puts a hole into Tolliver as a potential, I don't call him a sleeper, but like a late-round guy that maybe could find his way into some fantasy value. And for a dude like Andrew Wiggins, who was already a fantasy disaster, this is just another reason to avoid, as if we needed it. Well, Luol Deng is never going to be the guy he once was. He's an old man, but you have to think of it just from a number standpoint. Let's say they only give him 14 minutes a game. They're coming from somebody. It's not in lieu of some other dude off the bench. Maybe a couple of them are, but it's an opportunity for Thibodeau to go to the guy he knows and trusts, who obviously still wants to play for him, even though he nearly broke the poor dude. And he'll go bench some young guy who's not doing exactly what he wants. Minnesota looks to me like a much hairier proposition than in seasons past. I mean, Karl-Anthony Towns, he's going to rise above it. I do think he has an injury this season. We've talked about that before. Jimmy Butler, he'll rise above it from a fantasy perspective. He probably will also have an injury at some point this year. But, I mean, this reeks of problem. Little piece of news. Number 2. The Cavaliers are officially the destination for Rodney Hood. Right? I mean, we're talking little news here. But this is all stuff to look at. There was a world last season where Rodney Hood was kind of on the cusp of fantasy value. He only averaged 11 points, 2.5 rebounds with Cleveland last year. He was decent in the playoffs. But there's no LeBron now. So you kind of have to go to the numbers. And this is why it's tough to do, by the way, analyses of NBA teams before all of the pieces have actually been put in place. The Cleveland Cavaliers roster for this upcoming NBA season looks like this. Jordan Clarkson, we're going to go alphabetically because, that's a way to do it. Jordan Clarkson, Sam Decker, Channing Frye, George Hill, Rodney Hood, Kyle Korver, Kevin Love, Larry Nance Jr., David Nwaba, Shidi Osman, Colin Sexton, J.R. Smith, Isaiah Taylor, Tristan Thompson, and Ante Zizic. You guys know that my stance on Kevin Love bucks the industry. This is one of those ones to me, and here, listen, let's just talk about Cleveland for a minute, and we'll get to Rodney Hood as part of this greater discussion. I would say that most industry analysts are very down on Kevin Love. To me, I think that it's an interesting risk and a risk worth taking. If you listen to my podcast where I was guesting with In This League, that was on Friday again, with Lord Bogman, Lord Welsh, and Jonas Nader of RotoWorld, they were all pretty much against me. Jonas, obviously, we ended up making a wager on that podcast. You should, again, just go listen to it if you want to hear what it was. It involves Kevin Love. Jonas brought up a good point, which is that Kevin Love is a shutdown candidate. But I think sometimes we, as a fantasy community, we get a little caught up in the idea of the shutdown. Guys don't usually get shut down that early. There's a couple players. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Eric Bledsoe, 2 years ago with the Phoenix Suns, he got shut down at the All-Star break, and that was absolutely soul-crushing. If you look at last year, you basically want to look at the worst teams in the NBA and shutdown situation. So teams that were desperately trying to lose. The Chicago Bulls, they pulled the plug on a lot of their guys with about a month and a half to go. That was rough. The Grizzlies, they basically pulled the plug on Tyreek Evans. Marc Gasol actually played a lot of those games last year down the stretch in kind of a weird twist. Like last year, he ended up getting to 73 basketball games. That, I believe, is more than most of you would have expected, myself included, when it became clear that Memphis was going to be throwing in the towel, which was pretty early because they were 7-5 when Mike Conley went down, and then they just lost every game forever. But Gasol kept playing. He played the same number of games as the year before where they were competing for a playoff spot. You know, so this idea, I think, of the full shutdown is a little bit overblown. It's a legitimate concern for the worst few teams in the NBA, where if a team's just like, you know what, we're done. Stick a fork in us, we are done. Then you have to be a little bit concerned with the early shutdown. The late shutdown, if you're in a roto league, it's not that crushing, right? Like, let's stick with Marc Gasol, actually, because he is, or was, a decent enough NBA player on a very bad NBA team last year. He finished up as the number 42 player on a per-game basis, and he finished up as the number 36 player on a totals basis. That's better. His 73 games from that 40, whatever I said, spot actually was better than most of the guys around him in that chunk of teams. So if you're looking at a guy like Kevin Love and your great concern is that Cleveland realizes they're not going to make it and they just sort of half pull the plug on him like Marc Gasol this last season, if he gets to 70-some-odd games, I believe Kevin Love can be a second-round pick. And if Cleveland finds themselves within any sort of striking distance of the 8th spot in the Eastern Conference, and he doesn't get badly hurt, I mean, that's another discussion here with Kevin Love, and he exceeds 75 games this year, he actually has a chance to be a turn kind of guy. Like a wheel range, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 sort of value. Now, obviously, the other ding on a guy like Kevin Love is that he has been hurt a lot lately in his career. He had one really healthy season with Cleveland, but largely he's missed some significant amount of time. So if that's your concern, that he's actually going to be hurt and he's going to miss 20 games and he's going to play 62, then yeah, I totally get it. He's not a guy you want to take a flyer on wherever he's getting drafted right now, middle, end of third round. But to me, that's a risk. Because even 60-some-odd games at the type of fantasy level he could play is worth it for the chance that he goes well above that. I'm totally out on an island with this one. I'm all by myself. He was the number 26 player, by the way, in 9-cat last year on a per-game basis. He played in only 59 games, though, and so obviously that number drops pretty precipitously when you flip it over into totals. He's at 51. Okay, that's what you're working with. But better, but no LeBron. He played 59 games last year, and he was a top 51 fantasy player at last year's clip. If you ratchet that up, he might play 59 games and be a top 40 guy this year. And if he goes better than that in the games played department, I love the upside there. The rest of that Cleveland Cavaliers roster is absolutely a mishmash. George Hill, Colin Sexton, the point guards, how's that going to shake out? Jordan Clarkson, shooting guard, scoring type. Rodney Hood, shooting guard, scoring type. Kyle Korver, shooting guard, scoring type. J.R. Smith, shooting guard, scoring type. I honestly don't believe that anybody's going to win those position battles for the season. David Nwaba, wing guy, hustle player with energy and some defense. Sheedy Osman, wing player, scoring, young. We don't really fully know his stat set. If I had to take a guess, because they just gave Kevin Love a $160 million extension, and they haven't gone full youth yet. They've gone Colin Sexton here, who's probably going to get a lot of time at point guard. I do think the Cavaliers are going to try, at least early in the season, to win basketball games. We'll see how that goes. Well, the Eastern Conference has its share of issues, so they might be able to pick off a few and maybe feel okay about themselves after a month of the NBA campaign. And for that reason, I do think George Hill ends up playing some significant minutes this year. Like I said, Kevin Love, I think you see a decent chunk of Larry Nance, although he can't stay healthy if they up his minutes. And then, throw them all into the pot, man. Shake them up, see what comes out. Is J.R. Smith going to get the bulk of the minutes at shooting guard? I don't know. Rodney Hood? I don't know. I would avoid all of those guys. There's too many wings on the Cleveland Cavaliers. They got rid of LeBron, and that opened things up a little bit, but the more of these sort of mid-tier bodies they bring in, the more convoluted it becomes. I would love it if two of these guys got traded or shut down, or, I hate to say hurt, because you don't wish that on anybody, but just thin the herd a little bit. It's the Miami Heat problem all over again. If Kyle Korver gets moved, if they didn't sign Rodney Hood just now, and you're talking about George Hill, J.R. Smith, Jordan Clarkson, Osman, you could probably put a decent amount of your shekels on the notion of one of those guys emerging with value. But as it stands right now, I think Kevin Love is your safe bet. I do think George Hill sustains a measure of value because he has the length to play at the 2 if they had to, and he's better than those other guys. And then you've got Colin Sexton, who, by the way, I would definitely not take a flyer on in 9-cat formats. 8-cat maybe, but there are going to be some serious rookie efficiency issues as he adjusts to the actual NBA game. Serious issues. And now the big news from the weekend. Devin Booker, this one coming out of left field, has surgery on his hand and will miss 6 weeks of action. Whoa. This is a big one. Devin Booker is a guy, and we talked about ADPs here on shows last week and the week before. Devin Booker is a guy that's been going in the 2nd round in a lot of Yahoo drafts. Very, very early round pick who suddenly, shades of Kawhi Leonard, has surgery. Big medical news just pops up right before the start of the season. He is ranked, by the way, as the number 24 player in Yahoo's preseason ranking. And if we go to the projected situation for Yahoo, I believe it gets even higher. Although they may have already adjusted due to the surgery on Booker. All right, so we're going to throw that out. Is adjusted now? His games played got dropped a bit, and he's number 40 in the projected numbers. And then in drafts right now, and this is what we've been looking at lately in great detail, Booker's been going at 23.8, basically the last pick of the 2nd round in standard 12-team leagues. So we are talking indeed about a 2nd-round pick who, out of nowhere, magical here, has hand surgery. That's awful news. All right, but let's run the numbers on this. 6 weeks, and we've been doing the countdown on Tuesdays with Adrian, but we can go ahead and do it today. It's September the 10th. 6 weeks from today, well, 3 weeks from today is October 1st because we did that earlier in the show. 6 weeks would be October 22. That's after the start of the season, folks. That's a week into the year. So I've seen both, by the way. I've seen both sides of this discussion take place. One is, well, it's only 6 days into the season. If he really truly is back on October 22nd, he's missed 6 days of an NBA season that is basically 6 full months long. About 180 days. 6 out of 180 ain't much. That's a 30th of the NBA campaign. But on the other hand, is there any guarantee that when he comes back, he is 100% healthy? He will have missed training camp. Not that that's as big of a deal for NBA players. They generally get loose pretty quick. But you lose your opportunity. It's not, it's not like with baseball where these guys really do need spring training to sort of get the feel back for the game. It's all timing. The NBA, game or two, the rust is kind of off. But if we're talking about a guy that's having issues with shooting in any way, and this is a guy that's going to need to be ball handling a lot for Phoenix. He's going to be taking the most shots in the Phoenix offense. And I don't know that we can necessarily call this a thing as of yet, but he has been a bit hurt to this point. There was an element of tanking in what went on last year with Booker, but he still only played 54 games. That's crazy low. He may need to prove to us again that he can make it through an entire NBA campaign. So I think what you're doing here, at least in terms of adjustments, is you have to assume that he misses a week of basketball, so about, say, 3 games. About 3 games a week now with the extended schedule. And it probably takes him another week. But that's a conservative estimate probably, right? About a week to get his timing back. So let's call it about 6 kind of either lost or clunky games on the ledger for Devin Booker. That doesn't sound that bad. That's still 76 if he plays in every other game. But you have to apply the same formula you were going to play when you thought he was going to play in 82. If you thought he was only going to play in 77 of 82 games, apply that same ratio to the remaining 76. Okay, maybe he's going to play in 73 of those 76, 72 of those 76. And now suddenly you're talking about a guy who's missing 10 games. Can you really take a guy who's injured to start the year that you're going to be building your team around in fantasy? My opinion on this, and this is opinion, this is definitely not something set in stone, is no. I love guys that are bouncing back off a season where maybe they were a little bit dinged up, but over the course of their career, it's not really been their thing, right? Like Steph Curry. He had an off season last year after a number of very good ones in a row. Oladipo the previous year. But you know me, guys. I do not like to open up my season with a key component on the shelf. Too many things can go wrong. What if there's a setback in his recovery? And maybe you'll have more time between now and then to find out how the recovery is going. Obviously, there's a very reasonable chance we get an update in like 3 weeks, right around when a lot of us are having our fantasy drafts. Oh, Devin Booker's recovery is going great. Everything's going great for old Devin Book. He's going to be right back on time. Okay, maybe then there's a slightly better opportunity to pick him up and draft him. Maybe we get a report that things aren't going well, and it becomes more clear that we shouldn't draft him. But as it stands right now, on September the 10th, as this, part of building our strategy, I do not like taking a guy that early in a draft that suddenly just has not only a red flag put on their name, but an actual surgery. This is not a guy where it's like, oh, well, he's dealing with a little bit of soreness. This is a full-on medical procedure that's keeping him out for a month and a half. Tread lightly. It doesn't, by the way, presumably change the fantasy values of many of the other guys in Phoenix. You might be able to squeeze some other dude on that team for a nice first week. But as soon as Booker's healthy and playing, he's going to be racking up all the shots and minutes he can handle. So don't stretch this to other players on the Suns. But in my opinion, this is a guy that basically is coming off the table for me in roto leagues. And head-to-head, might just lose the first week, I guess. Could think of a worse scenario. But roto, I don't like it. I don't like having a guy that important sitting on the bench to start the year. I feel it's too important in roto leagues to draft a mostly healthy team. I think one is, in my opinion, the greatest number of injured guys you should look. And in that case, it's one that's going more like round 8 or 9. You guys know me anyway. I wasn't a massive Devin Booker fan because of his lack of defensive stats. He was poised to have a very potent season. He's going to be doing a ton in Phoenix. He's going to be a turnover machine this year. Absolute machine. He was at 3.6 last year, doing a lot of the ball handling. 4.7 turnovers to 3.6 turnover. I don't like that ratio. I didn't like the low defensive stats. He's going to be scoring, man. He's going to be putting up massive, massive scoring lines, and he's a big-time free throw percentage dude. But to me, I actually like a number of the other guys on Phoenix more, believe it or not, because I feel like their values and they're not going into the year hurt. It's rough. It's rough. It's not, and it's different than Kawhi Leonard. That's what I think a lot of you are going to go to when you're like, well, I'm thinking about drafting Kawhi Leonard. Why not Devin Booker? Well, you know what? Those guys are not coming off a surgery that has them set to miss the first week of the season already. It's why I said I wouldn't touch Kawhi last year. When we heard that he was coming into the season hurt, that's the single biggest red flag. Because we want these guys to be successful so badly. We want to have them on our team. We want everything to work out so beautifully that we sort of draft them despite the red flags and bad news. But sometimes you just have to let someone else take that risk. That's my feel. You don't have to do it. You can still take the risk, and it might work out awesome for you. And maybe we'll see his ADP fall significantly. Maybe he'll start going towards the end of the third round. I don't know. We're going to keep an eye on it. And if he starts to fall, then he crawls back into the conversation. But I'm not taking a guy with my second-round pick that starts the year on the shelf. Not going to do it. Go get the draft guide again, everybody. I told you why earlier in the show. It's at hoop-ball.com. I am Dan Besbris, at Dan Besbris on Twitter. Hoopball is at Hoopball Fantasy and at Hoopball Tweets. Those are the two main accounts. Coming up the rest of the week on Fantasy NBA Today, Adrian Benjamins and I will be discussing more Dynasty on tomorrow's podcast. That's a fun one. I'm getting sort of a Dynasty workout here over these last few weeks. I'll be back solo on Wednesday doing a mailbag show. I'm going to turn Wednesdays into mailbag for a couple of weeks here. Talk to Neil Rochlani on Thursday, and Adrian and Neil will wrap up the week with Friday's episode of the pod. Once again, Happy New Year to those of the Jewish faith. Lishana Tova, as we say. And to the rest of you, find a Jewish friend and go enjoy some apples and honey with them. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.